Every evening at exactly 6:30, when the last students packed up their bags and the hallways grew quiet, an older woman in a gray uniform would appear with her cleaning cart. Her name was Mei Lin, and she had worked as a janitor at the Westbrook Conservatory of Music for 22 years. She knew every corner of that building better than anyone. She knew which floorboards creaked near the practice rooms. She knew which windows let in the cold draft during winter. She knew the exact spot where the afternoon sunlight hit the grand piano in the main hall, making it glow like something from a dream. But nobody really knew her. To the students rushing past with their violin cases and sheet music, she was just the cleaning lady. To the professors discussing compositions in the faculty lounge, she was background noise. Sometimes a young student would smile and say thank you when she held the door open. Sometimes a professor would nod in her direction. But most of the time, people looked right through her, as if she were made of glass. Mei Lin never complained. She did her job quietly, carefully, the same way she had done everything in her life. She mopped the marble floors until they shined. She dusted the portraits of famous composers that lined the main corridor. She emptied trash bins filled with crumpled music sheets and coffee cups. And when she was alone, truly alone, she would sometimes stop in front of the grand Steinway piano on the main stage and just look at it. She never touched it. Not once in 22 years. But oh, how she wanted to. You see, there was something about Mei Lin that nobody at the conservatory knew. Something she had buried so deep inside herself that sometimes even she forgot it was there. Before the gray uniform, before the mop and bucket, before the decades of invisibility, Mei Lin had been someone else entirely. She had been a pianist, not just any pianist. Back in Shanghai, in another lifetime, she had been called a prodigy. At 7 years old, she played her first public concert. At 12, she was accepted into the prestigious Shanghai Conservatory of Music, the youngest student in her class. At 16, she won the National Youth Piano Competition, and her photograph appeared in newspapers across the country. People said she had magic in her fingers. They said when she played, you could feel the music in your chest, like a second heartbeat. Her teachers said she was destined for greatness. Her parents, simple factory workers who had saved every penny to buy her a second-hand piano, cried with pride. The future seemed bright and endless, like a road stretching toward the horizon with no end in sight. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. In 1979, when Mei Lin was just 19 years old, everything changed. Political tensions were rising. Her father, who had spoken too freely about things he shouldn't have, found himself in trouble with the authorities. One night, her mother woke her up in the darkness and told her to pack one small bag. They had to leave. Immediately. There was no time to say goodbye to her teachers. No time to play one last concert. No time to even look back at the piano that had been her whole world. They fled in the middle of the night, first to Hong Kong, then eventually to America, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope of starting over. America was supposed to be the land of opportunity, and in some ways, it was. But opportunity looks different when you arrive with no money, no connections, and no way to prove who you used to be. Mei Lin's competition medals, her certificates, her newspaper clippings, all of it was left behind in Shanghai. In America, she was just another immigrant with broken English and empty pockets. Her parents worked double shifts at a garment factory. Her younger brother needed braces, then glasses, then help with college tuition. There was always another bill, another emergency, another reason why Mei Lin's dreams had to wait. She took whatever job she could find. She cleaned houses. She washed dishes at a restaurant. She worked overnight shifts at a laundromat, folding strangers' clothes, while the radio played songs she didn't recognize. Years passed. Her father got sick. The medical bills piled up. Her brother graduated college and moved away. Grateful but distant, building his own life far from the struggles of their past. Her mother grew old and frail, and Mei Lin took care of her until the very end. By the time Mei Lin finally had a moment to breathe, to think about herself, she was already in her 40s. Her fingers, once so nimble and precise, had grown stiff from years of scrubbing and lifting. Her confidence had faded like an old photograph left too long in the sun. She told herself it was too late. The dream was gone. Some things, once lost, cannot be found again. That was when she saw the job posting for a janitor at the Westbrook Conservatory. She almost didn't apply. Walking into a music school every day, surrounded by young talents living the life she had lost, wouldn't that be torture? Wouldn't it be like pressing on a bruise that never healed? But something pulled her toward it. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was longing. Or maybe, deep down, she just wanted to be near the music again. Even if she could never be part of it. She got the job, and for 22 years, she kept her secret. Every day, she walked past practice rooms, where students struggled with the same pieces she had mastered as a child. She listened to their mistakes, their frustrations, their small victories. Sometimes, she wanted to knock on the door and say, "Try it softer there, let the note breathe." But she never did. Who would listen to a janitor? At night, when the building was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the heating system, Mei Lin would stand in the main hall and look at the Steinway. It was a beautiful instrument, 9 feet long, with keys that gleamed under the emergency lights. She would imagine sitting down, placing her fingers on those keys, feeling the familiar weight and resistance. But she never did. She was afraid. Afraid that her hands would fail her. Afraid that the music inside her had died. Afraid that if she tried and couldn't play anymore, she would lose the last piece of herself that still remembered who she used to be. So she kept cleaning. She kept mopping. She kept being invisible. And everyone at the conservatory kept walking past her, never knowing that the woman pushing the cart had once made audiences weep with her music, never knowing that behind those tired eyes was a lifetime of sacrifice and silent grief, never knowing that greatness can sometimes wear a gray uniform and carry a mop. 22 years of silence, 22 years of watching others live her dream. But fate has a funny way of catching up with us. And for Mei Lin, everything was about to change in a way she never could have imagined. It started, as many life-changing moments do, with someone else's misfortune. The Westbrook Conservatory's Spring Gala was the biggest event of the year. It was the night when wealthy donors in expensive suits and designer dresses gathered in the main hall, sipping champagne and writing large checks. It was the night when the conservatory showed off its finest talents, reminding everyone why their money mattered. For the students, getting selected to perform at the gala was a massive honor. It could launch careers. It could open doors that would otherwise stay closed forever. This year, the featured performer was a senior student named Theodore Wright. He came from old money. His grandfather had donated the library wing. His mother sat on the board of trustees. Theodore was talented. There was no denying that. He had skilled fingers and perfect technique. But there was something missing in his playing. Something that the professors whispered about when he wasn't around. His music was correct, but cold, technical but empty. Still, with his family connections, he was the obvious choice for the gala. Mei Lin had been preparing the hall for 3 days. She polished the floors until they reflected like mirrors. She cleaned every window until not a single smudge remained. She dusted the chandeliers, arranged the chairs, and made sure every detail was perfect. Nobody thanked her, of course. Nobody even noticed. But she took pride in her work anyway. If the hall was going to be filled with beautiful music, the least she could do was make sure it looked beautiful too. On the afternoon of the gala, just 5 hours before the doors were set to open, chaos erupted. Mei Lin was in the storage closet refilling her supplies when she heard shouting from the main office. She stepped out quietly, not wanting to intrude, but close enough to hear what was happening. Theodore Wright had been in an accident. He had been cycling to the conservatory for one final rehearsal when a car cut him off. He swerved, lost control, and crashed into a parked vehicle. His left wrist was broken in 2 places. He was at the hospital right now, crying not from the pain but from the realization that his moment was gone. The dean was pacing back and forth, his face red with panic. Several professors stood around him, throwing out suggestions that went nowhere. "What about Jennifer from the junior class?" one professor asked. "She's at a family wedding in another state," another replied. "David Chen? He only plays violin. There must be someone, anyone." The dean loosened his tie like he was choking. "The donors will be here in 5 hours. 5 hours? We have a $200,000 evening planned. And we have no pianist. Do you understand what this means? We'll be a laughingstock. Mei Lin stood frozen near the doorway, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She knew she should walk away. This wasn't her problem. This wasn't her world anymore. She was just the cleaning lady. What could she possibly do? But something stirred inside her. A small voice, buried under decades of silence, began to whisper, "This is your chance. This is the moment you've been waiting for," without even knowing it. She tried to ignore it. She told herself she was being foolish. She was 68 years old. She hadn't performed in nearly 50 years. Her hands were stiff. Her confidence was shattered. What if she sat down at that piano and nothing came out? What if her fingers had forgotten everything, but the voice wouldn't stop, and neither would her heart? Before she could talk herself out of it, before logic and fear could win, Mei Lin stepped forward into the doorway and spoke. "I could play." The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. The dean blinked, confused, like he wasn't sure he had heard correctly. One of the professors actually laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound that he quickly tried to cover with a cough. "Excuse me?" the dean said. Mei Lin's cheeks flushed with heat. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. "I said I could play the piano. I know how to play." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Mei Lin could see the doubt on their faces. She could see them looking at her gray uniform, her worn hands, the mop she had left leaning against the wall. To them, she was suggesting something ridiculous. A janitor playing at the spring gala? It was absurd. A woman near the back of the room, Theodore's mother, Mei Lin, realized, let out a sharp laugh. "Is this a joke? You want the cleaning lady to perform for our donors? People who have given millions to this institution?" The words stung, but Mei Lin held her ground. She had spent a lifetime being invisible. She had spent a lifetime swallowing her pride. But something had shifted inside her. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was courage, or maybe she was just tired of being no one. "I trained at the Shanghai Conservatory," she said quietly. "I won the national youth competition when I was 16. I know it was a long time ago. I know I don't look like a pianist anymore. But I promise you, I can play." The dean stared at her, his expression shifting from disbelief to something else. Curiosity, perhaps. Or maybe just desperation matching her own. "You trained in Shanghai?" he asked slowly. Mei Lin nodded. "Before I came to America. Before everything changed." The room was still. Theodore's mother crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The professors exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, the dean let out a long breath. "Do you have any proof? Any recordings? Certificates? Anything?" Mei Lin shook her head. "Everything was left behind. I have nothing but my word." "This is insane," Theodore's mother snapped. "We cannot let some random janitor perform at our gala based on a story she probably made up. The embarrassment alone would. What other choice do we have?" The dean interrupted, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He turned to Mei Lin, studying her face. "If I let you play, and you fail, it's not just your reputation on the line, it's the entire conservatory." "I understand," Mei Lin said. "You would have to audition. Right now. If you can prove you're capable, then maybe, just maybe, we can consider this." Theodore's mother threw her hands up. "You cannot be serious." But the dean was already walking toward the main hall, gesturing for Mei Lin to follow. "Come, show me what you can do." Mei Lin's legs felt weak as she followed him. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. After 50 years of silence, she was about to sit at a piano again, and not just any piano, the Steinway she had looked at every night for 22 years, the one she had never dared to touch. The hall was empty except for the dean and two professors who had trailed behind, their faces skeptical. Theodore's mother stood near the door, arms crossed, already preparing her criticism. Mei Lin walked slowly toward the stage. The Steinway sat there, waiting, its black surface gleaming under the lights. She climbed the 3 small steps, her knees trembling slightly. She pulled out the bench and sat down, the keys stretched out before her, white and black, familiar and terrifying all at once. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They were cold, smooth, perfect. For a moment, she just sat there, eyes closed, breathing slowly. The room was completely silent. She could feel their doubt pressing against her like a weight. She could feel her own fear trying to choke her. But beneath all of that, something else was rising. Something that had been asleep for 50 years. The music, it was still there, buried deep, but still alive. Waiting, Mei Lin took one final breath, opened her eyes, and began to play. The first note rang out through the empty hall, and time seemed to slow down. Mei Lin had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of the first pieces she had ever mastered as a young girl in Shanghai, back when her fingers were quick and her heart was full of dreams. She had played it hundreds of times before, but never like this, never with 50 years of silence weighing on her shoulders. Never with so much at stake. Her fingers moved slowly at first, hesitant, like they were remembering how to speak a language they had almost forgotten. The notes floated through the air, delicate and searching. She made a small mistake in the third measure, her ring finger landing slightly off-center. She winced internally but kept going. The dean stood near the front row, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. The 2 professors beside him watched with raised eyebrows. Theodore's mother remained by the door, her expression cold and impatient, already convinced this was a waste of time. But then something began to shift. As Mei Lin played, the stiffness in her hands started to melt away. The music was waking something up inside her, something that had been sleeping for decades. Her fingers began to remember, not just the notes, but the feeling, the emotion, the soul of the piece. The melody grew stronger, the hesitation faded. And suddenly, Mei Lin wasn't in the conservatory anymore. She was back in Shanghai, 11 years old, playing this same piece for her teacher while sunlight streamed through the window. She was 16 again, on stage at the national competition, her heart pounding with joy instead of fear. She was every version of herself she had ever been. All at once, the final notes of the nocturne hung in the air like mist over a lake. Then, silence. Mei Lin lifted her hands from the keys. She was trembling. She didn't dare look up. She didn't want to see disappointment on their faces. She had given everything she had. But was it enough? For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, slowly, the dean began to clap. It wasn't enthusiastic applause. It was slow, measured, thoughtful. But it was real. He stepped forward. His expression completely changed from before. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked quietly. Mei Lin finally looked up. "I told you. Shanghai. A long time ago." The dean turned to the professors beside him. They nodded, their skepticism replaced with something like wonder. Even Theodore's mother had uncrossed her arms, though her face was still tight with reluctance. "It's not perfect," the dean said honestly. "There were some rough spots. Your timing was slightly off in a few places, but the feeling, the emotion behind it." He paused, searching for the right words. "I haven't heard anyone play like that in a very long time." Mei Lin felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to appear weak. "So what happens now?" she asked. The dean took a deep breath. "The gala is in 4 hours. That's not enough time for you to prepare a full program. But it might be enough time for you to prepare one piece. One perfect piece." He looked at her carefully. "Do you think you can do that?" Mei Lin thought about the question. 4 hours to prepare for the most important performance of her life. 4 hours to undo 50 years of rust and silence. It seemed impossible. But then again, so had everything else. "Yes," she said. "I can do it." The next 4 hours were a blur. The dean arranged for Mei Lin to use one of the private practice rooms, the nicest one, with a beautiful grand piano and soundproof walls. She sat down and began to work through Chopin's Ballade. No, 1-inch G minor. One of the most challenging and emotional pieces in the piano repertoire. It had been her signature piece back in Shanghai. The one that had won her the national competition. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. Her fingers ached. Muscles she hadn't used in years screamed in protest. But she pushed through. Note by note, measure by measure, she rebuilt what time had taken from her. Meanwhile, word spread quietly through the conservatory. The janitor was going to play at the gala. Some people laughed. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. A few students gathered near the practice room door, pressing their ears against the wood, trying to hear what was happening inside. One young woman, a freshman who had always smiled at Mei Lin in the hallways, knocked softly on the door. "Excuse me," she said when Mei Lin opened it. "I heard you needed something to wear tonight. I brought you this." She held out a simple black dress. Elegant, but understated. It wasn't expensive, but it was beautiful. Mei Lin stared at it, then at the young woman. "Why are you helping me?" The girl shrugged. "Because everyone deserves a chance to be seen. And because I've heard you humming in the hallways sometimes. You hum like someone who really loves music." Mei Lin took the dress with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." When 7 o'clock arrived, the main hall began to fill with guests. They came in waves. Men in tailored tuxedos, and women in glittering gowns. Their jewelry catching the light from the chandeliers. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed off the marble walls. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Mei Lin watched from behind the stage curtain, her heart hammering in her chest. She had changed into the black dress, which fit her better than she had expected. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly. She wore no jewelry, no makeup. She looked plain next to the glamorous crowd, but she didn't care. Tonight wasn't about how she looked. Tonight was about the music. The dean appeared beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," she admitted. He smiled slightly. "Good. That means you care." He glanced at the crowd, then back at her. "I'm going to introduce you in about 10 minutes. I'll keep it simple. I won't mention your background as a janitor unless you want me to." Mei Lin thought about it. Part of her wanted to hide, to let the audience think she was just some mystery guest artist. But another part of her, a stronger part, was tired of hiding. "Tell them the truth," she said. "Tell them everything." The dean raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? I've been invisible for 22 years. I don't want to be invisible anymore." He nodded slowly, a new respect in his eyes. "All right then. I'll tell them." The minutes ticked by like hours. Mei Lin stood in the darkness behind the curtain, listening to the murmur of the crowd, the clink of glasses, the polite laughter. These people had no idea what was about to happen. They expected a pleasant evening of standard performances. They expected nothing special. They were about to be very surprised. Finally, she heard the dean's voice through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for the Westbrook Conservatory Spring Gala. As many of you know, we had an unexpected change in our program this evening due to an unfortunate accident involving our scheduled performer. But sometimes, life's surprises lead us to unexpected gifts." He paused. The crowd quieted. Tonight's performer is someone most of you have seen before, though you may not have noticed her. For the past 22 years, she has worked here at the conservatory as a member of our custodial staff. But what none of us knew is that she was once a prize-winning pianist at the Shanghai Conservatory in China, before circumstances forced her to leave her dreams behind. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Mei Lin could imagine their faces. Confusion, disbelief, maybe even amusement. Tonight, for the first time in nearly 50 years, she has agreed to play for us. Please welcome to the stage, Mei Lin. The curtain parted, the spotlight hit her face, and Mei Lin walked toward the piano. The walk from the curtain to the piano felt like the longest journey of Mei Lin's life. The spotlight followed her every step, harsh and bright, exposing her to hundreds of eyes. She could hear the whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. She didn't need to hear the exact words to know what they were saying. The cleaning lady? Is this some kind of charity stunt? What is the dean thinking? She kept her eyes forward, focused on the piano. The beautiful Steinway sat center stage, its black surface gleaming under the lights like still water at midnight. For 22 years, she had looked at this instrument from a distance, never daring to touch it. Now, the whole world was watching her walk toward it. Her legs felt heavy. Her mouth was dry. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn around, to run back behind the curtain, to disappear into the shadows where she belonged. She was 68 years old. She was a janitor. Who was she to stand on this stage in front of these wealthy, important people? But she kept walking. She thought of her mother, who had worked her fingers raw in a garment factory so her children could have a better life. She thought of her father, who had died in a hospital bed, holding her hand and telling her he was proud of her even though she had never become the pianist he had dreamed she would be. She thought of all the nights she had spent alone in this very hall, staring at this very piano, wondering what might have been. No more wondering, no more hiding. Tonight, she would finally know. She reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, letting her hand rest gently on its curved edge. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She could feel the power sleeping inside it, waiting to be awakened. Slowly, she sat down on the bench. She adjusted her position, the way she had been taught as a child, back straight, shoulders relaxed, feet flat on the floor. The keys stretched out before her, 88 of them, white and black, simple and infinite. The hall had gone quiet. The whispers had stopped. Every eye was on her now, watching, waiting, judging. Mei Lin closed her eyes. She thought of Shanghai. She thought of the small apartment where she had grown up, with the second-hand piano squeezed into the corner of the living room. She thought of her teacher, a stern old woman with gentle hands, who had taught her that music was not about playing the right notes but about telling the truth. She thought of the girl she used to be, full of fire and dreams, before the world had taught her to be small. Where did that girl go? She was still here. She had been here all along, hiding inside the gray uniform, waiting for permission to come out. No more waiting. Mei Lin opened her eyes, lifted her hands, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade. No. The piece began softly, gently, like a question being asked in the darkness. The melody was simple at first, almost hesitant. A single voice searching for something it had lost. Mei Lin let the notes breathe, giving each one space to speak. In the audience, a woman in a red dress leaned over to her husband and whispered something dismissive. A man near the back checked his phone. Theodore's mother sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of polite skepticism. But then the music began to build. The melody grew stronger, more insistent. The harmonies deepened. What had started as a whisper became a conversation, then a story, then a flood of emotion that poured from the piano, like water breaking through a dam. Mei Lin's fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys with a precision that surprised even her. The years of rust and silence fell away. And suddenly she was not a 68-year-old janitor anymore. She was the girl from Shanghai. She was the prodigy. She was everything she had ever been, and everything she had been afraid to become. The music swelled and crashed like waves against a shore. It sang of loss and longing, of dreams deferred and hope that refused to die. It told the story of a life interrupted, of decades spent in the shadows, of a voice that had been silenced but never destroyed. In the audience, something was changing. The woman in the red dress had stopped whispering. Her hand was pressed against her chest, her eyes wide. The man near the back had put away his phone and was leaning forward in his seat. Theodore's mother had uncrossed her arms, her carefully composed expression cracking like ice in spring. One by one, the masks came off. A professor in the third row wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, pretending he wasn't crying. A young couple held hands tightly, their champagne forgotten on the table beside them. An elderly donor, a man who had seen hundreds of performances in this very hall, sat absolutely still, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. They had come expecting pleasant background music, something to accompany their expensive dinner and polite conversation. They had not expected this. They had not expected to be moved, to be shaken, to be reminded of something they had forgotten they knew. Music is not about perfection, it is about truth. And the truth that poured from Mei Lin's fingers was devastating. The piece reached its climax, a thunderous cascade of notes that filled every corner of the hall. Mei Lin's hands flew across the keys, her body swaying with the rhythm, her face transformed by an expression that was part joy, part grief, and part something beyond words. She was not performing anymore. She was confessing. She was releasing 50 years of silence in a single, glorious flood of sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had built, the storm began to quiet. The melody returned, softer now, wiser, touched with a sadness that comes only from having lived a full and difficult life. The notes slowed. The passion cooled into something gentler, something that felt like acceptance, like peace. The final measures approached. Mei Lin played them with exquisite tenderness, each note placed with the care of someone saying goodbye to an old friend. The last chord hung in the air, fading slowly, dissolving into silence. Mei Lin lifted her hands from the keys. She sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had given everything. There was nothing left inside her. She felt empty and full at the same time, exhausted and alive. The hall was completely silent. For one terrible moment, Mei Lin thought she had failed. She thought the audience was sitting in stunned disappointment, too polite to boo but too unimpressed to clap. She thought she had made a fool of herself in front of hundreds of people, confirming everything Theodore's mother had believed about her. She opened her eyes. What she saw took her breath away. The entire audience was frozen, not with boredom or disappointment, but with something else entirely. They looked like people who had just witnessed something they couldn't quite explain. Their faces were open, vulnerable, stripped of the polished social masks they had worn when they walked in. A woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face. She wasn't wiping them away. She wasn't embarrassed. She just sat there, weeping openly, her eyes fixed on Mei Lin. A man beside her was shaking his head slowly, not in disapproval but in disbelief, like he couldn't quite accept what he had just heard. Even Theodore's mother looked different. Her hard expression had softened. Her eyes were bright with moisture she was trying desperately to hide. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. And then, from somewhere in the middle of the hall, a single person stood up. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. And then came the sound that Mei Lin had waited 50 years to hear. Applause. Not polite, obligatory applause. Not the kind of clapping people do because they're supposed to. This was something else entirely. This was thunder. This was a roar. This was hundreds of people pouring out their amazement and gratitude and emotion in the only way they knew how. Mei Lin sat at the piano, overwhelmed, as the wave of sound washed over her. Tears spilled down her cheeks. And this time she didn't try to stop them. She had done it. After 50 years of silence, she had finally been heard. The applause did not stop. It went on and on, wave after wave, filling the grand hall with a sound that Mei Lin had only ever dreamed of hearing. People were not just clapping. They were shouting. They were cheering. Some were still crying, wiping their faces with napkins and handkerchiefs, not caring who saw them. Mei Lin remained seated at the piano, her hands trembling in her lap, completely overwhelmed. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the past 50 years. She had pictured it in her small apartment late at night, when sleep wouldn't come and the silence felt too heavy to bear. But nothing she had imagined came close to this. Slowly, she rose from the bench. Her legs felt unsteady, like they might give out at any moment. She turned to face the audience and gave a small bow, the kind her teacher had taught her when she was just a girl in Shanghai. The applause grew even louder. People began moving toward the stage. The dean was the first to reach her, climbing the steps with tears glistening in his eyes. He took her hands in his and shook them firmly. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In 40 years of running this conservatory, I have never witnessed anything like that. You have given us a gift tonight that none of us will ever forget." Mei Lin didn't know what to say. Words felt small and useless compared to what had just happened. So she simply nodded and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a chance." "I'm worded just of I." More people gathered around her. Donors who had never looked at her twice now wanted to shake her hand. Professors who had walked past her in the hallways for 2 decades now looked at her with new eyes. Students pressed forward, some asking for her autograph, others simply wanting to tell her how much her performance had moved them. And then, through the crowd, came Theodore's mother, the woman who had laughed at the idea of a janitor performing, the woman who had called this whole thing ridiculous. She walked slowly, her face different from before. The sharpness was gone. The judgment was gone. In its place was something softer, something almost fragile. She stopped in front of Mei Lin and stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then, to everyone's surprise, including her own, she reached out and took Mei Lin's hands. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I looked at you and saw what I wanted to see. I didn't see you. And I am sorry for that." Mei Lin studied the woman's face. She could have held a grudge. She could have thrown the earlier insults back in her face. But what would be the point? Life was too short for bitterness. "We all make judgments," Mei Lin said gently. "The important thing is being willing to change them." The woman nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then she stepped aside and disappeared back into the crowd. The rest of the evening passed like a dream. Mei Lin spoke with more people that night than she had spoken with in the past 10 years combined. Everyone wanted to know her story. Everyone wanted to understand how a janitor had become the most talked-about performer the conservatory had ever seen. She told them the truth. All of it. The childhood in Shanghai. The competition she had won. The night her family fled. The decades of sacrifice and silence. She held nothing back because she was done hiding. She had spent 50 years being invisible. And she would never be invisible again. That night, someone in the audience had recorded her performance on their phone. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. It started small, just a few shares among the guests who had attended the gala. But then it spread to their friends, and their friends' friends. And soon it was being posted on every social media platform imaginable. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines appeared around the world. "Janitor stuns elite crowd with breathtaking piano performance." And "The cleaning lady who made a concert hall weep." Within a week, the video had been viewed over 20 million times. Mei Lin's phone, which usually only rang when the conservatory needed her to cover an extra shift, began ringing constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Talk shows wanted her as a guest. Concert halls from New York to London to Tokyo reached out, asking if she would be willing to perform. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and wonderful. The dean called her into his office a few days after the gala. She walked in expecting some sort of routine conversation, maybe paperwork about the media attention. Instead, she found him standing by the window, looking out at the campus. "Sit down, please," he said. She sat. He turned to face her. "I've been in this job for a long time," he said slowly. "I've seen a lot of talented people come through these doors, prodigies, virtuosos, people with all the advantages in the world." He paused. "But I don't think any of them have taught me as much as you have in this past week." Mei Lin frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You reminded me why I got into this field in the first place," he said. "It wasn't about prestige or donors or fancy galas. It was about the music. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that." He smiled. "You helped me remember." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the desk toward her. "What is this?" she asked. "An offer," he said. "We would like you to join the conservatory as an artist in residence. You would have access to any piano on campus, anytime you want. You would teach master classes when you feel ready, and you would never have to push a mop again unless you wanted to." Mei Lin stared at the envelope. Her hands were shaking. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," the dean replied. "Say yes." And let us give you what you should have had all along. She picked up the envelope. Inside was a formal letter, detailed and official, offering her a position she had never dared to dream of. Her eyes blurred with tears as she read it. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I accept. The months that followed were like something out of a fairy tale. Mei Lin performed at concert halls around the world. She was interviewed by major newspapers and magazines. She received letters from people in dozens of countries, all telling her how her story had inspired them to chase their own forgotten dreams. But through it all, she never forgot where she came from. She kept her small apartment. She visited the conservatory often, walking the same hallways she had once cleaned, now greeted with smiles and waves from everyone she passed. She started a scholarship fund for immigrant students who couldn't afford music lessons. She wanted to make sure that no one else had to wait 50 years for their chance. One evening, about a year after the gala, Mei Lin found herself alone in the main hall. The chairs were empty. The lights were dim. It looked almost exactly the same as it had on all those nights when she had stood here with her mop, staring at the piano from a distance. She walked to the Steinway and sat down. She placed her fingers on the keys, just as she had done hundreds of times before. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't dreaming. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't hiding. She was home. She closed her eyes and began to play. The music filling the empty hall, rising up to the ceiling and beyond. And if anyone had been listening, they would have heard something rare and precious in those notes. They would have heard the sound of a heart that had finally found its way back to itself. Some people say that it's never too late to follow your dreams. Mei Lin used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better. But now she knew the truth. It's not just something people say. It's real, and it's never, ever too late.